The host for this session is Michael Lowry. You met him yesterday. He's the Executive Director, Defence Engagement at Telstra, and he's also the new chairman here at the TM Forum. I think, as I mentioned yesterday, Telstra describes Michael as the go-to guy when it comes to anything and everything about the networks of today and tomorrow. So he's pretty well placed to understand where the telecoms industry is going. He is going to be talking to Anne Bouverot. She's the Director General of the GSMA. Anne is also a member of the board of the GSMA, and she was previously Executive Vice President for Mobile Services for France Telecom Orange. She began her career as a project manager for Telmex in Mexico, so she's got a real global perspective which she brings to the GSMA, and she's also a passionate advocate of women playing a greater role in this industry. So if I could welcome Michael and Anne to the stage.
Well, good morning everybody, and nice to be out here again. Anne, welcome to Nice.
Thank you.
Hope you had a great journey down and travelled down very late last night to be with us, so it's a real privilege to have her here today.
Thank you.
The format will be similar to yesterday. Anne will give her keynote shortly for about 15 minutes, and then we'll open it up for some Q&As for about another 15 minutes overall. Just remind everybody the hashtag TM Forum Live. Get your questions in there while Anne's doing her keynote. We'll pick them up on the tablet here, and we'll have an opportunity to ask Anne those questions as we go through the second half of the segment. So Anne, over to you, and we look forward to what you're going to say.
Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you. And good morning, everyone. I'm here to speak about the future of mobile. And maybe before we start, or just as we start, you're probably thinking, well, but everybody already has a mobile, so what's the future? But I'd like to pause for a second. Is it really true that everybody has a mobile? In this room, I think pretty much so I'm not going to ask you that question. But I would like to ask how many of you have more than one mobile-enabled device, a second smartphone, a tablet that has a SIM card and is mobile-enabled. If you have more than one mobile-enabled device, can you raise your hand? I do have more than one, so yeah, almost everyone. Okay, so then to my initial question, does everybody have a mobile? You'll say, no, we tend to have two. Yes, in our developed world of professionals, we tend to have two mobile-enabled devices, two devices with SIM cards on average. And in emerging markets, people who use mobile tend to have two SIM cards, and they swap between these SIM cards, and they'll put them in a device if it enables them to use a particular data plan or be in a particular coverage area. So when you see figures like more than 7 billion mobile connections in the world, 7.1 billion is the number today, that's the number of SIM cards. Yeah? So you have to discount that by a factor of 2. Because if you want to get to the number of people who have access and use mobile, you have to account for the fact that we all have at least two, and people in emerging markets tend to have two SIM cards. So the number of people in the world who really use mobile services is about half the world's population. It's 3.6 billion people. Half the world's population only has access to mobile. So only, I mean, it's the world's furthest reaching communications platform. 3.6 billion people is a huge number, but it's only half the world's population. So that's the initial thought that I wanted to have on this presentation, because that's a little bit counterintuitive, but it shows that there's still a lot to be done to give access to mobile and to the mobile internet to half the world's population. So I'll come back to that in the end. But at the GSMA last year, we conducted an exercise with our members. Our members are all the mobile network operators in the world. And we consulted them, and we wanted to agree the focus areas for our organization and for our industry Where do mobile operators want to work together and on which programs? And through this exercise called Vision 2020, we came up with 4 priorities: personal data, digital commerce, connected living, and Network 2020, which is really 4G for now. And what I would like to do is to spend a few minutes on each of these 4 priorities, because I hope you'll find them interesting, and then just share a few thoughts on advocacy and public policy, and then I'll be more than happy to take questions, as Michael said. So the first area is personal data, or digital identity. I'm absolutely passionate about the digital identity. I believe that through the fact that we each have a mobile in which there's a SIM card, which is the same, exactly the same chipset and the same level of security that you have in a credit card in a banking environment. Through that, and through the fact that we always carry our devices with us, we have a very secure tool in a way to verify identity in a very simple way, because we're all fed up with multiple passwords that we have to remember, lowercase, uppercase, etc., numbers. And so we want simple things, we want secure things, and we also care about our privacy and our data. So I believe there's a huge opportunity for mobile operators to provide a solution which we call Mobile Connect, which is a universal way of verifying the identity of the person who wants to use that to get online, get access to their bank statements, get access to their health records. And we have an initiative that we announced in Barcelona at Mobile World Congress, the GSMA Mobile Connect initiative, that I'm sure you will hear about more throughout the year as more operators implement that and make that available. So that's the personal data area, something that I'm very passionate about, and I'm sure you'll have more questions about it later. Connected living is the machine-to-machine area, the Internet of Things. You're all very familiar with that. Lots of numbers floating around. 25 billion connected devices by 2020 is one of the numbers. As any prediction, it will be wrong, but it's a huge number, and it will be huge. This will transform a whole range of sectors. The early sectors where we see this happening: connected cars, smart meters, but there will be more and more. What we're doing at the GSMA is working on the impact on networks. If you have millions and then hundreds of millions and billions of devices who are all programmed to upgrade their capabilities on the same day, at the same time, at the same second in a given network, this will be a big problem. So we need to look at how to adapt things to make sure networks are able to handle what usually can be very sparse and very limited amounts of traffic, but sometimes could be bursty. We're also working on modernizing and adapting SIM cards and provisioning of SIM cards on those devices. If you're talking about the smart meter that will stay put somewhere for 15, 20 years, you need to be able to remotely over-the-air provision credentials on that SIM card. And we have defined a technical specification for this, which we published at the end of last year. So again, fascinating area, and I'm sure you'll have more questions about connected living. Digital commerce is the ability to pay with your mobile phone. There's 2 areas there. One is what we can do in our world, where we all have already credit cards and all sorts of bank accounts and mobile phones, more than one. This is the complex piece, because there's many players and stakeholders, and nobody holds the keys in their hands to make this work single-handedly. So we need to work across the value chain, across the ecosystem, and simplify the interfaces. And I'm sure this is something that will be very dear to your hearts and interests, so we can discuss this more. But one thing I wanted to draw your attention to is that in emerging markets, this is actually moving ahead and growing much faster. Because in countries where actually you don't have that many bank accounts, that many banking facilities, there's more of the population that has access to mobile, and mobile payment, mobile money transfer has been growing quite significantly. So we already have more than 200 mobile money services live in the world. Over 200 million registered users, 200 million, this is really growing to be sizable. And more than half of these mobile money services are actually in Africa. So this is really something that is starting from the developing world, Africa, Southeast Asia, Latin America a little bit, and that is showing that innovation can actually start from not the highly evolved areas of Silicon Valley, Israel, Europe, but in emerging markets. And I think that's a very important point that I wanted to highlight today. So I've spoken about 3 of our 4 pillars. The 4th one is Network 2020, which at some point will take us into 5G, but for now is 4G. So 4G actually is only at the beginning. There are about 200 million 4G connections in the world today, and that's compared to the 7 billion connections that I mentioned at the beginning, so we're really at the very beginning of this. And it has started in a few countries. The US, Japan, and Korea, together these 3 countries account for more than 3/4 of existing 4G connections at the end of last year. And the corresponding number for Europe was 3% of 4G connections at the end of last year. So it will grow in Europe. Europe is lagging behind a little bit on 4G, despite having been at the inception of mobile. Europe is lagging behind on 4G. Europe will continue to grow. But China has launched 4G, and we expect that this will actually continue to skew the big volume of 4G connections towards Asia. And by 2017, we expect that half of the world's 4G connections will be in Asia. So what we're doing at the GSMA, we're looking at interoperability, the next stages of 4G or voice over LTE and rich communication services. Recent launches by PCCW in Hong Kong, Singtel, AT&T, T-Mobile in the US, a few more. We are working with operators on these launches and on the fact that they need to be interoperable. They need to interconnect in country. They need to be interoperable when you travel. That's something that we've learned to accept and expect for all of our mobile services. It's not the case yet for voice over LTE, and we're working on that. And at some point, we'll start working on 5G, but for now, even though a number of people are starting to talk about 5G, nobody really knows what 5G is. So we'll come to that, I'm sure, at some point later. So those were the 4 pillars of our Vision 2020 work that we've agreed with our mobile operator members: personal data and identity, digital commerce, including in emerging markets, connected living, machine to machine, and Network 2020. Another part of our role at the GSMA is industry advocacy. That involves talking to government and regulators all over the world and trying to push forward subjects that we think are beneficial not only to the industry, but to the economy of countries all over the world. And one of the very important topics that we advocate for is spectrum. Because we all, with 3G and then 4G, are using our mobile devices more and more. We're using them for video and things that really require a lot of bandwidth. There is a need for more spectrum for this traffic to be carried and for the industry to deliver services to consumers according to what they want. And it's very important that this spectrum be harmonized on a global basis, that the same spectrum bands be used for mobile all over the world. And the reason for this is that's how network providers and device makers can make devices, this is not my smartphone, but they'll make a device that can be the same or a very similar one in various countries in the world, and therefore can be cheaper and more affordable for consumers. So it's very important that we have harmonized spectrum, but it's very complicated. It's a very long process to allocate spectrum to mobile, to clear it if it was being used by other users, then to license it, and then to deploy a network on it. On average, 10 years. So right now, we're working to identify spectrum that will be needed by 2025. And next year, the ITU has a big conference, the World Radio Conference 15, that will discuss which bands should be allocated to spectrum for the 2025 horizon. So that's one big piece of our work on this. That's the what do we need for the economy and for consumers. There's also what can we do to help society. And digital inclusion, financial inclusion are big areas of focus for us. We have a mobile for development team that works mostly in emerging markets, looking to enhance digital inclusion and financial inclusion with donors such as the Gates Foundation, the government agencies for aid in the UK, in Australia, in the US, and many more donors. We have done a lot on financial inclusion, and we have helped the development of mobile money and mobile payment services in Africa and emerging markets. And we're also working on digital inclusion, ensuring that beyond the 3.6 billion people who use mobile today, as I said at the beginning, more of the world's population can enjoy the benefits of having access to mobile and access to the mobile internet. So that's another part of what we do in industry advocacy. This is what I wanted to share with you in my presentation this morning. I hope you will have many questions, and we'll have an interesting debate just after this. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Anne. Some really, really interesting topics there, but one that caught my attention very much was the whole digital commerce bit and how that will involve GSMA and the TM Forum, maybe getting some leverage between each other, because, you know, our frameworks, you know, tool sets, and a lot of the things we've worked on traditionally have been about how we deliver stuff to our customers. So how do you see that leveraging between GSMA and TM Forum around digital commerce? And maybe others, but I'll just pick on digital commerce for a moment.
Yes, no, with pleasure. Digital commerce, as I say, is a bit of a complicated area where you want to have mobile operators who provide the mobile services to customers, work with banks who provide the banking services to customers, with retailers because you want to be able to pay in shops and have the whole loyalty coupons part of this. Then you'll want to, of course, get into the transportation area and be able to pay for all your various transportation tickets. And if I just stop there, we're at hundreds and thousands of stakeholders that need to work together. So I think anything we can do to simplify the points of interface between these various players is hugely important. What we focus on at the GSMA is to get mobile operators to agree to have a standard or a standardized interface to the back end of the wallet that will be put on smartphones. And I think any help we can get from the TM Forum on this, on enabling this, would be hugely appreciated, because that's what we want to have, that's what we need to have, this single standard point of interface into which people can plug. So I certainly welcome collaboration on this.
Well, that's good, and we'd obviously look forward to that very much as well. Just on a second piece that I picked up, mobile identity. Many of the operators now are trying to move towards the whole unified identity, one identity regardless of what device you're using. How do you see that linkage happening between where the operators are trying to drive to a single sign-on unified identity, yet the GSMA ploughing down the mobile identity path? Is there an overlap? Is there a synergy? Is it mutually inclusive? Would love your view.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think where we're coming from on the identity part is the experience of users today. I mean, you and I'm sure, I mean, I have a bank account in France, I have one in the UK. They have two different ways of securing the way I can access to my information. My UK bank wants me to have a token to secure my access. I mean, I'm like you, I travel all the time. I don't have my token with me, so it's particularly cumbersome. My French bank account will send me an SMS that then I have to enter into the screen on my computer to confirm a payment. I do carry my mobile with me, so it's slightly more convenient. But if I could avoid having to go and look at the SMS and retype it, it would be simpler. So I think what we're trying to do is to simplify that user experience. Instead of a token, you have your mobile phone with you. It's not less secure than a token. It can do exactly the same things. So I think let's use that. And instead of having to re-enter an SMS, I mean, let's just use the communications capabilities of your mobile phone and make sure that that can then be preloaded into the system that you're trying to enter just because you've given your identity. So it's about using existing tools, working exactly towards the same objective of single sign-on and digital and unified identity from the perspective of let's use what is here and the fact that we always have our devices, or at least one of them, with us.
Great. Now, I noticed you got a little bit of, I guess, wearable there on your wrist. Tell us a little bit about that and how's that work for you?
Yeah. Thank you. So this is the Samsung Gear Fit. The Gear Fit 2, what they say for Samsung things is always take version 2. Version 1 is a beta. So anyway, I didn't have version 1. I had a Fitbit before. I don't have any particular company that I always use their services. But I think this is a great trend. This is an activity tracker, so it tracks your steps. It can track your sleep if you want to, which is very handy for me because as I travel a lot, sometimes it's difficult to clock in a reasonable amount of sleep. That helps remind me that I need to go to bed, regardless of the time of day in the particular place of the world where I am. But you can also, if you want, because it can be scary, but if you want, you can get notifications when you have an SMS or a call or an event in your calendar. If you don't want to, you don't get it. And for me, it's convenient because it has the time in Paris and the time wherever I am, in London most of the time, but other places, so I can sort of know a bit more where I am. So I think there's a huge trend for wearables, I think more so on wrist wearable devices. Glasses and rings and other devices, maybe they'll take a bit more time, but certainly bracelets, I see a bright future for them.
Great. It looks nice. It's colourful.
Thank you.
And I guess you can mix and match with your wardrobe as you go along.
Absolutely.
That's really good. Now, just moving along into you talked a bit about 4G and 5G.
Yeah.
There's a legacy, that the mobile world's almost got a legacy now of many countries are still 2G.
Yes.
And where do you see the enormous amount of work that's involved in trying to keep a 2G environment running, a 3G environment running, a 4G environment running? Has a GSMA got a view of what the industry needs to do around that? Because it would become cost prohibitive at the end of the day, yes, and quite challenging. But equally, with people changing countries and roaming, if you get off the plane somewhere and you've only got a 2G phone and the 2G environment doesn't exist, then, well, you're in trouble. But I'm interested in your views.
So that's a very good point, the cost of managing overlapping networks. And I'd go even further because the cost of launching a new generation, for example, for 3G, it was particularly acute in Europe. The cost associated with that was, one, the cost of the licenses, I mean auctions for 3G spectrum in Europe, which is crazy, and then the cost of rolling out the new network equipment. The reason for which I think Europe lags behind in 4G has in part to do with the fact that operators' balance sheets were loaded with huge amounts of debt associated with what they had to pay to be able to deploy 3G. So the costs both of operating and investing in a new generation are absolutely huge. And then the cost of ensuring you have interoperability, roaming, that everything can work are very big as well. So from that perspective, I think we need to be careful not to rush into 5G. 4G has only really started, as I said, and in any generation you have intergeneration evolution. So we're already seeing LTE advanced, as we saw HSPA for 3G. There's a lot that 4G still can do to evolve. NFV, SDN, that I'm sure you discuss a lot. That's all possible with 4G. So I think we should be careful to maximize the potential of 4G before we get into another generation. And the other generation is a bit hyped a little bit. We get some equipment vendors, but some politicians as well, speaking about 5G and the need to rush into 5G. Well, I'm not sure we should rush into 5G because of the cost element and because we don't really know what it is. So until we know that it's groundbreaking and really a revolution for consumers, we should spend a bit more time defining it, I would say.
So there's a bit of runway left for 4G yet.
Yeah, oh, I think there is.
In this whole mobile world with mobile identity, security is obviously a key issue. And, you know, customers need to build confidence. If they're going to use anything, they need to feel there's a level of confidence. Is the GMSA got to focus around what they're doing as they roll out with mobile identity about how they're going to address those security issues?
Yeah, so security, I completely agree, is hugely important. It's actually even more important today. People are worried, one, about their privacy, but two, about the security of their data. I think Snowden and the NSA story really got people to think about how their data and what they do online can be seen by everyone. I think that's one angle, but the other angle is just identity theft. I mean, people who download whole sets of credit card accounts, retail information. I mean, every day there's a new story. One of the latest ones was eBay, but there's a new one really every week. And therefore, security is hugely important. So what we do at the GSMA on this is we look at network security. So we have very clear guidelines for operators on the protocols used on networks. But we also very much stress the importance of the SIM card, because that is a very secure chipset that every mobile phone has. And it's the same chipset that banks already have or are putting on their credit cards and debit cards. That's a hell of an amount of security that we can tap into and use to secure users' data. So yeah, we're working actually with the banking industry as well, linking our fraud and risk groups together. My UK bank, whenever I go to China, I'm going to China next week, and buy something at the airport before I take my flight. Whenever I land back in Europe, I have a message saying, please urgently call your bank because somebody has tried to use your bank account in China. And I'm like, yeah, it was me. And you know, my mobile operator knows I was there, so maybe you two could talk and verify that it was really me and not somebody who stole my card. So.
So rather than annoying you, get them to sort it out themselves.
Yeah, exactly, sort it out.
Very good, very good. About 3 years ago in Barcelona, I know we promoted 50 billion SIM cards by, I forget when it was now, 2020 or something along those lines. You know, you talked about being close to 25 billion now. How do you see that trend going? Is it 50 real? Is it 50 underestimated, overestimated?
So I think as any prediction for 2020 and in billions, it's bound to be wrong. I think the number I've mentioned today is 25 billion by 2020. So yeah, 25 is very different from 50. Both are huge numbers. So I think we will get a huge amount of connected devices by 2020. Maybe it's not 25 billion, maybe it's 10 billion, maybe it is 50 billion, I don't know. But there's a huge opportunity. What we need to do is to understand the different types of requirements for different industries. If you're talking connected cars, you have the security part of the connected car, so the network needs to be live all the time. It can't be rebooting while you have an accident. It needs to be there. If you're talking entertainment in the car for your children in the back seat, well, that's different. That's huge amounts of data. If you have a little bit of screen freeze from now and then, that's okay. I think they can look through the window for half a second. If you're discussing smart meters, you're talking about very small amounts of data, information about your data consumption, but that aggregated will be able to help optimize energy consumption at the level of a county, a city, a country. So we have to adapt to the various requirements and make sure it becomes easy for these various industries to use the possibilities given by the technology.
Well, that's great. So look, I think a very good coverage of the pillars from the GSMA here this morning. We've covered a fair bit of bandwidth in the overall discussion, from wearables through to 4G, possibly 5G, and where the industry is going, obviously mobile identity. So Anne Bouverot, thank you very, very much, and please thank Anne.
Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you all.